How's it going, everyone? Nick Templin here from Templin Scouting, and today we are moving on to the Dallas Stars for our next off-season prediction video. Now, if you look at the standings, you will notice that we did skip a team to move on to the Dallas Stars, but this was kind of a weird year where the next team in the standings that we would have done was the Montreal Canadiens, who actually did make the playoffs, and as we all know, is making quite a run of it right now. As I'm recording this video, they are currently one win away from making the Stanley Cup Finals, which would be a really impressive and improbable run that I'm sure most of us were not expecting. But yeah, so we're moving along to the next non-playoff team, which is the Stars. We'll get to the playoff teams after we've done all the teams that missed the playoffs. We do have, I believe, the Rangers next, and I think that's all the non-playoff teams all finished up. And then we can move on to some of the teams that lost in round one, like Toronto, which I think is going to be a really interesting video. We can get pretty creative with some of the trades there because they really need to do something different because everything they're trying right now just isn't working. But anyways, so we're starting into the Dallas video, and I believe this was the only trade I had previously involving Dallas, and that had Jamie Benn being sent to Detroit. I did see some comments on that video of people not liking that trade, so I will try and justify it to people in this video a little bit better than I did in my previous video. I'm sure people will still hate the trade anyways, because one of the reasons I saw that the trade was not liked was because he previously had history of injuring Dylan Larkin, which I was not aware of, but even if I was, it's not something that would prevent me potentially as a general manager, if I was in this position, from acquiring a player. They're all professionals. They can all put stuff like that past each other, especially because, you know, it's a fast-paced game. People get hurt, happens all the time, and, you know, it also happens all the time where you end up teammates with guys who have injured you in the past, and you just have to put that aside. And if, you know, Jamie Benn, as much as he likes to play a physical game, he is a really good leader for the Dallas Stars. He's been their captain for a while now. I think, 7 or 8 years he's been captain, something like that, probably more even. And so, you know, and Larkin is a level-headed guy, so that's something he could get over, you know, and they could become pretty good teammates, I think. The other thing that people kind of mentioned to me is why would Detroit kind of want an aging veteran on, you know, a deal that still has years left on it, you know, and he's kind of regressing and everything like that. Well, the way that I see it, one, Detroit can afford to make this move. They have a lot of cap space, and they're going to have a lot of cap space for at least the next 2-3 years. So this is something that they can handle for now, for sure. Two, Jamie Benn still has some upside for the top six, and if you eventually wanted to move him down into the bottom six, even though he's, you know, getting paid a lot, because a lot of guys are going to be coming up on entry level or much cheaper deals over the next few years for Detroit, that's something they can afford to have depth-wise. And overall, I think it just gives Detroit an opportunity to kind of build a more competitive roster than what they've had the past couple of years, because they've definitely been using players that aren't, you know, NHL regulars or players who are playing above where they should be in their lineup. You know, because they just don't have anyone to put in there. Jamie Benn's a nice player that they can kind of fit anywhere top to bottom in their lineup right away. So, and again, you know, when you have cap space, you can go out and make a big splash like this. Stevie Y is, you know, pretty savvy when it comes to these kinds of moves. Now, other people did say that they wouldn't want to give up Michael Rasmussen in this trade. Well, you know, the way I see it is, you know, he was drafted in 2017, so that's 4 years ago now. And, you know, he was a former top 10 pick. And as far as I've seen, he hasn't really surpassed the value of a third-line center at this point. He is a big center. He has some offense to his game, although really he hasn't, you know, shown that yet at the NHL level. And, you know, some people are saying they want to be patient with him, and that's fine, because he is still young. You know, if you want to compare, he was drafted the same year as, you know, Nico Hischier, who are still waiting on to really break out, although not a great comparison because Nico Hischier has actually had value in the NHL already, whereas Michael Rasmussen really hasn't. Compare him to Nolan Patrick, who's dealt with a lot of injuries, so we haven't really seen him break out yet. But, you then compare him to Nick Suzuki, who was drafted after him, who's already become a star in this league. And you kind of, you got to take it all with a grain of salt because every player develops differently and it takes everyone a certain amount of time to develop. But the way that Michael Rasmussen is being played and being used in Detroit right now, I just don't see him getting any better than he already is. Whereas in Dallas, if he does get used in a bigger role, eventually, then maybe they can get something out of him, and that's why Dallas would want to make a trade like this. They're getting Evgeny Svechnikov, who has been pretty injury prone. He's kind of getting to the point where development doesn't really seem like it's in his future, but he is a guy who at one point had a lot of talent, enough to be a first-round pick for Detroit, and that maybe Dallas can throw in a depth position, or continue to develop him for a little bit longer in the minors just to see if they've got something there. And then a couple of second-round picks. Jamie Benn probably won't get you a first-round pick at this point in his career. But as Dallas, you want to get some value for him because he is your captain. And if you want to compare to a guy like Nick Foligno and the return that he got last year at the deadline, obviously at the deadline values spike a little bit more than they would be in the offseason, but Nick Foligno is a similar kind of second or third line, hard-hitting, plays the game physically, kind of winger with leadership, and Toronto paid a first-round pick to get him. While I don't think the Jamie Benn is quite worth a first-round pick, definitely the 2 seconds would be reasonable, I think. And overall, I think it's a good move for Dallas to move on from him. Gives them some cap freedom to work away with some of the other players that they have coming up right now. Gives them the ability to sign Gurionov to a better contract the next year. Gives them the ability to, they have to sign Heiskanen this offseason, so that's going to be a lot of money being handed out there. So, for sure, with a team like Dallas, who their main core is kind of getting older now, with, their main star players being Seguin, who was hurt for all of last year, except for like the last 4 or 5 games, I think, and then Radulov and Pavelski, who, they're getting up there in age as well. I think Radulov 34 or 35, Pavelski's 37 or 38 in that range. So, and below them, they do have some good young players there. Jason Robertson had an awesome rookie season, and I think Dallas fans should be really excited to see what he brings in the future. And then Denis Gurianov had a really good playoff run with them a season ago. But outside of that, like Faxa and Hintz are really solid players. But, neither one of these are going to be the guys that actually Hintz will put in at the second line for now just because he's, I think, a little bit better than Radek Faxa. Both of them are on good deals, though, and I think they should be really happy about that for the time being. Faxa especially because they have him for the next 4 years. He's going to be a really good third-line center, I think, for them. Looking at Hintz, he was pretty productive offensively. He's become a pretty good playmaker, depending on who you get on his line with him. We might see Jason Robertson move up in that role. But yeah, outside of that, you don't have like the big star prospects coming up. Outside of, I do like Ty Dellandrea. I think he probably makes the team next season. And looking at some of the other guys here, Thomas Harley, I think, will be NHL ready starting next season. But when we look at the defense core the way it is before we sign Heiskanen here, it looks like they probably will need to add something because Andrei Sekera, he's definitely getting up there in age now, and he's really not the same defenseman he once was. Joel Hanley is probably best as like a 7th defenseman in an ideal scenario. It'll be interesting to see, and we'll take a look at the players that they have to re-sign this offseason defensively, but it'll be interesting to see if guys like Alexiak decide to return this offseason or not. Looking at the goalie situation, they kind of have a really lucky situation that most teams don't have, where they have 3 goalies here that they could put in on any given night and feel very comfortable in the performance that they're going to get from those goalies. Now, with that being said, you don't need 3 goalies that are capable each of their on their own of being, NHL starters, basically. I mean, that might be a stretch to say that for Ottinger, but I think he was very solid in the role that he played last season, with Ben Bishop being hurt for so long in the season. And it makes me wonder, do they go back to Ben Bishop now? After Anton Khudobin was the one who brought them to the Stanley Cup Finals and was their starter last year. However, last year wasn't nearly as successful. Or do they move Anton Khudobin, who's on a pretty affordable deal as far as for teams that might be looking for a 1A, 1B type situation? There's a lot of questions to look at the goalies here. But before we look into all that, because we will, we're going to take a look at the unrestricted free agents that the Dallas Stars have to re-sign this offseason. So, first off, Andrew Cogliano. He's had a really solid career, and I do see him getting picked up somewhere to play on the 4th line, but I do see Dallas moving on from him. Looking at Justin Dowling, he kind of just finally made the NHL for the first time at the age of 30. I thought he was solid, but again, another guy that they could definitely move on from. He's definitely a replaceable player. Looking at Taylor Fedun, he's definitely an alright depth defenseman that somebody might want to pick up, but I don't think that Dallas needs to. Looking at Jamie Alexiak, however, I think he's a guy that they're going to want to hold on to if possible. Now, I do think that the market for him might be pretty decent. He's a left-handed defenseman, so maybe not the same kind of value that you get from a lot of these right-handed defensemen in the league. But he is really big. He's a good skater. He's physical. Has good defensive side to his game. He's not perfect by any means. I mean, a lot of analytics guys probably wouldn't agree with a lot of what I'm saying here. But I do think that he is a solid guy to have in your second or third pairing to provide some depth and value there. So we will try and bring him back, and that's one of the nice things about the Stars having a lot of cap space this offseason is that they can afford to, increase the pay for a couple of these players here. So he made just over $2 million last year. We can move him to like $275 for the next. Can sign him probably for 3 seasons on that. Just make sure my zeros are right. I do believe they are. So Jamie Alexiak is returning to the team. We're going to move Joel Hanley down to the scratches here. Next, I don't think they will re-sign Mark Pysyk or Sami Vatanen. I think there will definitely be teams looking out for them. To be honest, I didn't even know that Sami Vatanen was playing for them this season. Totally did not realize that at all. I thought he had gone back to New Jersey. Maybe he was a deadline trade. I honestly can't remember. But Mark Pysyk, another guy who would be a solid depth defenseman somewhere. And Vatanen, I think, will find new life somewhere else, but he's definitely not what he was a couple of years ago. So, I do think that somebody will sign him. I don't think that Dallas has to be that team. Looking at our restricted free agents here for the Dallas Stars. That's not the Dallas Stars. Actually, let's go to Detroit first because we do have a couple of players to sign from Detroit. So with Michael Rasmussen, again, hasn't been super productive yet in his career, but because you do expect him to kind of have at least the value to be a 3rd or 4th line center potentially this year right off the bat, you can give him over $1 million, just barely. Give him a 2-year deal, kind of ask him to prove himself, and then there you go, throw him in on, and you don't have to use him at center, which I think would actually be really beneficial to him right now. So, throwing him in on the wing here could provide a really solid 3rd line here with Dellandrea and Faxa. So then looking at Svechnikov, I don't think he gets much more than what he was already making, because for right now, he hasn't played a whole lot in the NHL. Those 21 games he played last season, I mean, I think that's the most games he's played in a season in the NHL so far. I could be wrong, but definitely hasn't earned that big pay yet. So we'll probably go with like something around $850, just to get him to sign. And for now, we will put him in as a scratch. Might move him even down to the minors at some point, depending on how this roster is looking. So from there, we will look at our own restricted free agents here. So I think Nick Camano is a really solid fourth line option. He's not an offensive guy by any means, but I think he's a guy they're going to want to keep in their system at the very least. And I don't usually bring in guys that I just think they're going to keep in their system, because there's going to be a lot of guys like that here. But I do think that he's one that I specifically want to mention, because at the very least I could see him being a scratch or a consistent fourth liner depending on how things are looking this season. So we will bring him in. So there's some other interesting ones here. So we're going to look at Jason Dickinson. He could be a pretty good trade piece, I think, potentially, because the way I see it, he's kind of becoming a surplus unless they're okay with using him as a fourth line center. Because the way I'm starting to see this lineup, I don't see him fitting into really the top 9 at all. So we'll keep that in mind. I think potentially we could trade him for defenseman. So we'll go ahead and sign Miro Heiskanen, who's going to get a lot of money this offseason, probably somewhere in the $7.5 million range. Some people probably think that's going to be lowballing him. Personally, I think that if you can convince him to take that, that's awesome, because the more team-friendly deals that you can get on a team like this, the better you'll be long-term. So we'll go $7.5 million for 5 years. I'm sure there will be a lot of people that disagree with that, think he's going to get way more than that. But honestly, we'll see. We will see. So for right now, we'll just put Thomas Harley on the right side. He will try and keep... actually, I didn't realize this, but Heiskanen's a left D, or right D, so we will be totally fine here for now. Alright, so looking at the other guys here, Joel Kiviranta is probably a guy they do want to hold on to. Obviously, he didn't come out this season and play kind of the way he was playing in the playoffs, but if you do have a guy who's capable of those kinds of playoff performances for you, then that's obviously worth keeping, I would say. Even if it only comes around once you make the playoffs, you're not paying this guy, tons and tons of money just to be a playoff performer. You're getting him relatively cheap to potentially show up. And the other nice thing about having him actually is that, say you have somebody injured in your top 6, well, he has an offensive enough side to his game that you can move him up and put him anywhere in this top 6 and feel pretty comfortable with him there, even in a long-term situation. So for now, I really like what we're looking at here, but we're also going to be looking at some potential trades here. So just going through the rest of this list, I'm not going to sign any of these guys for now. Julius Honka is an interesting situation, obviously, because he has left the team to go play in Europe. I think that unless they find a way to trade him, and only if he gets traded to a team that he's really interested in playing for, will he actually kind of return to the NHL. Otherwise, I think he's pretty content with playing overseas. I also don't think that he would be getting the play time here unless they decided to trade Klingberg, or if they decided to release Sekera, because I don't think they're going to be able to trade Sekera. So, but yeah, for sure, he's a guy that could potentially get signed this offseason, could potentially get traded. But for now, I'm just going to act like there's nothing that will make him return to the NHL. And so anybody signing him or trading for him is just not going to work out. So we're going to move on to, actually, I'm going to look at the reserve list really quick to see if there's anybody here who would be ready to go. I do expect Stranges to get a contract at some point, but he's not NHL ready yet, so we don't have to worry about that. So let's take a look at a potential trade here. So we will add Jason Dickinson in here, and somebody else that could potentially be on the move is John Klingberg. Now, Klingberg has been really good offensively in the past for the Dallas Stars, like really, really good, really solid, and he's still a decent option offensively even now, but his defensive game has really struggled, and it's something that, you know, some teams will probably take a chance on if they think that their coach can kind of correct what they've seen from him, kind of correct him and make him a better defensive player, because it happens. You know, you see these offensive defensemen who develop a defensive side of their game with the right coaching. But yeah, so we're going to try and find a deal for John Klingberg. You know, this might be one that kind of surprises a lot of Dallas fans, or not. I don't know. I don't watch enough Dallas to know kind of how they feel about John Klingberg. But what I do know is that the stats aren't really in his favor. So definitely if they can move on from him, they won't be too upset about it, I don't think, at least from a team standpoint. So looking at some of the teams that could potentially acquire a guy like John Klingberg, and that might have something that they could offer in return that would be beneficial to this team. Just looking at some of the teams that we obviously haven't done yet. Looking at, just going through here. You know, it might be something that Tampa could be interested in, just because they could potentially bring in a guy like Klingberg and not sign him to too much money and shed some of their salary. But looking at, you know, Winnipeg is a potential team that could be interested in that, although I think they need more defensive defensemen there. Klingberg could be a Washington Capital potentially. I could see that making some sense. Looking at Edmonton, probably not, but it could happen actually. You know, he could come in and become the new Tyson Barrie in Edmonton, kind of the pure offensive defenseman there. Looking at Carolina, yeah, actually I could see that happening too, because they're most likely losing Dougie Hamilton. So let's see kind of what kind of a trade that would be. So obviously Carolina is going to have to trade some salary back to make something like this happen. But looking through here, you know, Nino Niederreiter is a potential guy that could be of interest here. I don't think that Pesce would be. Brady Shea, I don't think that's somebody that Dallas would be too interested in acquiring in this deal, just because that contract really isn't ideal. Toivo Teravainen, he'd be untouchable, I would say. Vincent Trocheck, yeah, I don't think that they could bring him in. Looking up to the top here, they could bring in Jesper Fast as their kind of the guy that they eat the cap of, or Jake Gardner. Yeah, maybe Jake Gardner would be the guy. So let's throw him in there. Obviously, there's going to be more to the deal than that. Morgan Geekie is a guy that I really like, but I think that Carolina likes him too, so I think they would try and hold on to him. Yeah, I think from here they could try and acquire... Actually, this could be interesting if they tried to acquire Anthony Honka to try and get Julius Honka to sign with them, but I think that's kind of a stretch. Looking at some of the other players that they could potentially acquire here, because I do think they're going to want to go for somebody on the younger side, potentially like a Zion Nybeck or Jamison Reeds. So looking at some of their options here, could bring in... Yeah, I think Zion Nybeck is an interesting option, just because he is the only reason that he fell in the draft, because I do believe he was a top 20 talent in last year's draft. It's because he's short. He's 5'7", I think, something around there. And as we're kind of seeing in the NHL now, that these short players, they're able to make a significant difference in the league. So, with the example of Cole Caulfield being out there and, he's playing awesome. I don't think Nybeck is necessarily to the level of Caulfield, but he is a guy who has a lot of offensive talent and has shown it overseas in the Swedish junior leagues. So I haven't been paying attention, I will admit, to what he's been up to this season, and it's something I'd like to check after I finish recording this. But I definitely remember being very impressed with him last season. And so just to kind of round out this whole deal here, throw in a third-round pick in this year's draft. I think the value's pretty close here. Dallas might want to acquire one more prospect, potentially, like a C-plus type prospect here. They could acquire Blake Murray, who I am very fond of after watching him with the Sudbury Wolves. He had a really good connection with Quinton Byfield when they played together. So I do think that Blake Murray is kind of a prospect that not a lot of people are paying attention to, but I do know that Dallas really does their due diligence in scouting in the OHL with a lot of the players that they've picked in the past, so they'll probably recognize that Blake Murray could potentially be a guy who makes the team sooner rather than later. So overall, I wonder if I should up this to a second-round pick, but it's hard for me to gauge the value of John Klingberg right now. I think what's nice about him is he only has the 1 year left on his deal. So if things don't really work out, they don't feel stuck with his contract. But if they do work out, then you get to sign him to whatever deal and term that you want after this season, assuming he wants to stay, which I'm sure he would, because playing for Carolina, you'd be playing for a contending team. So I think overall, it's something that makes sense for both sides. I think that even though Jake Gardiner has gotten a bad rap in the past, the fact that his name hasn't come up nearly as often recently is kind of a good thing for him. I think he just kind of puts his head down, goes out there and does his job. He doesn't do anything too flashy like he was expected to in Toronto. And he's just kind of a guy who can play up and down in your defensive lineup. So I think I'm going to make this trade. I will admit that it's hard to gauge the value on each side for this trade because I don't know how some people feel about Zion Nybeck. Personally, I am very high on him. Blake Murray, I think, is a pretty decent prospect to potentially be a top 9 forward, and I think that a third-round pick is the only thing that really needs to tie it all together, because they're also getting Jason Dickinson, who will be potentially a solid third-line player for Carolina. But again, for Dallas, he's kind of surplus. With John Klingberg, getting rid of him creates a lot of potential freedom in your lineup of how you want to handle, the role that he played with the team. And obviously, this is making a lot of changes to the leadership group there, but there's definitely a lot of decent leaders within this lineup that they can kind of build around now, because obviously they have Pavelski, who can be either the new captain or an alternate. Tyler Seguin, he's kind of a wilder personality guy, but I wouldn't be surprised to see him get potentially a captaincy. They could give alternate captain to Miro Heiskanen potentially. So they have a lot of options with their leadership group next season, so they don't have to feel stuck with the fact that they're losing their captain in Jamie Benn and an alternate captain in John Klingberg. So looking at the cap space, they've still got about $9 million to work with. Another potential trade that I would like to look into is dealing either Ben Bishop or Anton Khudobin. I think Khudobin will be the one that gets dealt. I think you just kind of hope that Ben Bishop's health gets back to how it was even just a season ago when he was one of the best goalies in the league before the playoffs started. So we can look at a team that would potentially want to acquire Anton Khudobin. So you can look at Boston. It's a place that he's played before, so he's very familiar with the city and and the team has changed since he was there, but it'll feel like home to him, I'm sure. And they're going to be losing. Likely, they're not going to be bringing back Tuukka Rask, it sounds like. He obviously has been treated poorly by the media and by the fans the past couple of years. Obviously, with everything that was going on with his daughter during the playoffs last season, and everyone was saying blaming him for them losing in the playoffs because he left the team for family reasons. So obviously there's a little bit of a clash there between the fan base and him. And from Boston's standpoint, I mean, they got really, really solid goaltending from Jeremy Swayman when he was gone. Obviously, it's hard to say whether Swayman was a one-year wonder or not, and if he'll be able to come back and be what he was last season. Is Dan Vladar ready to be a backup goalie, or are they going to have to sign somebody else? But I think that bringing in Hudobin kind of provides a little bit more stability in that situation. And they're not overpaying to have a potential starting goalie or a potential 1A, 1B type situation next year. So I think this is the right landing spot for Hudobin for all those reasons. That being said, we got to figure out a return here. So just kind of looking at some of the guys that could go back the other way. With goalies, it's hard to kind of gauge the value of them because oftentimes people won't like to give up a first-round pick for a goalie. Obviously, Hudobin's not the type of goalie you would do that for anyways. And then looking at other things like, do they want to bring back a goalie prospect in return? I don't know. I think they're pretty solid goalie prospect-wise. Oysterley's, or Ottinger, not Oysterley. Ottinger is, he's a young prospect. I think he's 22 or something like that. Who will probably be ready to take over for Ben Bishop by the time that his contract is up. And I believe in the minors they also have, maybe he's in the reserve or the restricted free agents. Just going to check because I do believe they still have Colton Point. They do still have Colton Point. So he's a guy who could potentially make the league at some point as well. So, sorry, just going back to this trade here. Just trying to figure out who they could potentially get in return here. So, I like Ondrej Kase, and the only reason why I bring him up here is because he missed a lot of time last season, and maybe Boston doesn't want to wait and see if his really strong analytical side does come back following his injury. But I do think a lot of people would be upset to see him go as part of a trade like this. Jacob Lauko, he's kind of Boston's top prospect that hasn't quite made the league yet. I don't think they would want to give him up in a trade like this, to be completely honest. As far as other guys go, I really like Jeremy Lauzon, but I think Boston does too, so I think they might be curious to see kind of what they've got in him. As far as other guys who could potentially be available here, it is really hard to say. I think Urho Vankinen is a guy that they probably want to trade, but I do have a deal involving him already. He was sent to Columbus in a previous video. Jakob Zboril could potentially be an interesting option. Honestly, it's really hard to say. This might end up also just being a purely draft pick trade for Boston, where they don't want to give up any prospects at all, really. So I think what we're going to do, and I think what I'm going to stick to, is I'm going to involve kind of a B- level prospect type player here in someone like, let me just see, someone like Curtis Hall potentially. They could acquire Jacob Forsbacka Karlsson, who has not really made the transition over to the NHL just yet, but potentially with a new organization holding his rights, he might have a new opportunity kind of here, and throw a couple of draft picks in here. Let's go with a 2022 fourth and a 2023 third from Boston to make this trade happen. And boom, you got Jakob Forsbacka-Karlsson, a 4th round pick, and a 3rd round pick for Anton Khudobin. Now, obviously, he's a fan favorite here in Dallas, but when you look at the situation, these 3 goalies aren't going to want to all share the net. At best, you're going to get 2 of them to agree to share the net. And so, that's kind of my rationale with this move here. So overall, I think I like the way that things are looking here. Obviously, they're in a nice situation. They've got some good top 3 round picks for the next couple of years. Obviously, they didn't add any 1st round picks. I don't think they really need to. I think they're still in a situation where they're going to be able to be competitive if all these guys play the roles that they want them to play. They could potentially improve on 4th line center over Tanner Kiro, but for now I think it doesn't matter too much. He's not a guy that I'm super familiar with as far as more advanced analytics go, so I couldn't tell you if he's a really solid defensive player or a good face-off guy. It's something I would have to learn more on to make any sort of judgment like that. But overall, it's a situation where they have a lot of cap freedom. They have a team that could potentially be very competitive and could even go back to the playoffs again next year when the divisions go back to normal. And overall, despite trading away some key guys from this team, I still think that this roster is stronger without these guys than it was with them now. So people can let me know in the comments down below if you disagree, because there will always be people who do. If you liked what I've done in this video, consider giving it a like on the video, and consider subscribing if you want to see more content like this in the future.